Good morning. So today we'll be starting of gallstones, cholelithiasis. So gallstones are most common biliary pathology, and these are present in around 10 to 15% of adult population. We usually do not encounter, but sometimes when the goes for an ultrasound for some other pathology, and he diagnoses gallstones. And there are some autopsy findings in which it is found that 10 to 15% of adult population are having gallstones. So mostly 80% are asymptomatic. And cholecystectomy, laparoscopic cholecystectomy is one of the most commonly performed operations in general surgery. So the risk factors. Most commonly the patient is a fat, fertile female of 50s. So the obesity is very common because there is a derangement in metabolism of cholesterol, and for the same reason, the rapid weight loss is the reason. Then childbearing, multiparity, and female sex are more prone to gallstones. First degree relatives are more prone, and when a patient has undergone some bypass surgery, resection, or ileal disease, there is decreased absorption of bile salts. There is decreased enterohepatic circulation. So in these cases also gallstone are common, and increasing age. So pathogenesis. Normally the cholesterol is and calcium salt is present in soluble state in the bile salts, in the bile. But sometimes this cholesterol gets supersaturated. That means there are more amount of cholesterol, so that it cannot be dissolved in the dissolved state, or it cannot be in the micelles form. So in such cases, the cholesterol crystallizes and it forms stone. So there are three types of stones in gallbladder. Number one is cholesterol stone. Pure cholesterol stone are very less; they are around 10% only. And next is mixed stone. So mixed stone is contains cholesterol and calcium salts, and mostly the percentage of cholesterol is more in mixed stones. 70% content is mixed stones. And the third type is pigment stones. The pigment stones again can be two types: black and brown pigment stones. So it depends. The origin of black and brown pigment stones are totally different. So we'll discuss it later. As I said, pure cholesterol stone are 10%, mixed stones are 70% with major content cholesterol, and the pigment stones are 20%. So in this diagram, we can see the factors associated with the gallstone formation. So number one is stasis, when there is impaired emptying of gallstone, or when there is impairment in absorption or secretion. In such cases, gallstone form. And as I said, the other factors are supersaturated bile. For the responsible factors are age, sex, genetics, obesity, drugs, diet, and liver disease. And again, as I said, when there is decreased enterohepatic circulation due to some disease in distal bowel, there is an increase of gallstones. For example, ileal resection, or when there is increase in bowel transit time, and or sometimes when we are taking antilipidemic drugs like cholestyramine, in which there is decreased absorption of bile salts. So these are the factors. And another factor is cholesterol nucleating factor. Actually, the cholesterol crystals, they need a nucleus around which they can grow to form a stone. So the nucleating factor. अच्छा स्लाइड नहीं दिख रहा है.
हाँ सर. हाँ सर. होल्ड पे दिखा रहा है. होल्ड तो हटा दिया हूँ. होल्ड पे तो नहीं.
All participants are on hold. All participants are off hold. All participants are muted.
ठीक है.
ठीक है. So I think was a problem in transmission. So we are discussing about the factors which are associated with gallstone formation. So number one is the problem in emptying of the gallbladder. That means when there is stasis of bile. So it can be due to decreased emptying or increased absorption or secretion. Then comes the supersaturated bile. That means the bile is contains more cholesterol, so that it cannot be in soluble state. So these are factors are age, sex, genetics, obesity, drugs, diet, and liver disease. Next is enterohepatic circulation. When there is defect in enterohepatic circulation. So, for example, when there is resection of bowel, or when there is when the patient is taking some drugs like cholestyramine, then there are cholesterol nucleating factor. The stones need some nucleus around which they can grow. So, nucleating factors are mucus, glycoprotein, and infections, bacteria. So as I said, there are two types of stone basically, cholesterol stones and pigment stones. So as you can see, this is a picture of cholesterol stones, and they are yellow in color, and the pigment stone are dark or brown in black or brown in color. In this we can see black pigment stones. So, what is the pathogenesis of cholesterol gallstones? So, as I said, it involves three stages. One is the cholesterol has to be supersaturated in bile, and there should be factors for crystal nucleation, and then there is stone growth. The cholesterol is basically maintained in soluble form. Soluble form as number one is micelles, and number two is bile salt phospholipid cholesterol complex, and number three is cholesterol phospholipid vesicles. Most commonly it is present as cholesterol phospholipid vesicles. So let's discuss black pigment stones. So black pigment stones are present in patients in which there is increased degradation of bilirubin. So that increased degradation of bilirubin can be due to when there is hemolytic disease such as hereditary spherocytosis, in which the cells are round in shape. They are not flat shaped. Hereditary spherocytosis, and sickle cell disease, in which there is more destruction of RBC, especially in spleen. And when there is liver cirrhosis, that means there is decreased in bilirubin conjugation. So these black pigment stones are located in gallbladder. This part is important, as the brown pigment stones are located mostly in the bile duct. They are not. They are present primarily in the bile duct. And the black pigment stones are most common in the Asian countries, where there is more genetic predisposition of this hemolytic disease. Next is brown pigment stones. So, as the name suggests, the brown pigment stones are brown, soft, and earthy colored. They are typically found in bile ducts, and they contain calcium bilirubinate, palmitate, and stearate, and small amount of cholesterol. So basically, they are formed in bile duct. Again, the reason is stasis of bile and infected bile. So anything which leads to stasis of bile or infected bile can lead to brown stones. For example, when there is some foreign body after ERCP, we put stent in the common bile duct, or when there is some parasitic infection such as Clonorchis sinensis and Escherichiasis. In such cases, there is ascending bacterial infection, and there is, or when there is obstructive jaundice, when there is obstructive jaundice and stasis of bile. For example, when there is some stricture in the bile duct, in such cases, there is chances of brown pigment stone formation. So, what is the clinical presentation of gallstones? So, most commonly, patient presents with right upper quadrant or epigastric pain, and the pain may radiate to the scapular region. Normally, we call it as a biliary colic, but actually it's not a colicky pain, as I discussed in the last class. The pain is more often dull and constant type. It is not colicky in nature, and it lasts for around 1 to 5 hours, and then subsides usually within 24 hours. This part is important, as when we will discuss acute cholecystitis, the acute cholecystitis pain lasts for more than 24 hours. So if the pain is lasting for 1-2 days, then you should suspect acute cholecystitis. So these are symptomatic gallstones which we are talking about. When there is a pain episode, the patient also has nausea and vomiting. It may be associated with bloating and belching sensation. So clinical presentation is similar. Sometimes this picture is similar in peptic ulcer disease. So we should always rule out other problems with upper epigastric pain, or such as pneumonia. Then right renal calculus can also present. Then liver disease, hepatitis can also present as a right upper quadrant pain. Then hiatus hernia, reflux. These are associated with bloating and belching sensation and reflux problem. Then again, angina pectoris is another reason. So we should always rule out these grave causes before coming to the diagnosis of, because sometimes we find incidentally on ultrasound that gallstones are present, but they may be asymptomatic, and the problem may be somewhere else. So the relation of the gallstone with the pain is a must. So coming to the natural history of the gallstones. So what happens if the patient has gallstones? So as I said, most commonly the gallstone are asymptomatic, 80%, as rest 20% they are symptomatic. So of the asymptomatic patients, how many patients turn up to get symptoms? If some patient comes to you that he or she is having gallstone, and you can ask, what is the chances that I may develop pain, or what is the chances that I may develop acute cholecystitis or cancer? So you should be able to know these things. So asymptomatic patient, there is 1 to 2% chances of having symptoms of biliary colic, and there is only 0.2% chances of getting acute cholecystitis. So that's why these asymptomatic patients have very rare chances of acute cholecystitis and very less chance of biliary colic. So this should be managed conservatively. So coming to the symptomatic patients, so what can be the further progress of the disease? So we can say that symptomatic patient can go on to develop chronic cholecystitis. There is rare chances of gallbladder carcinoma in a 0.08% symptomatic patients. So this is also very less. And then there are chances of some complications related to the gallstones. Suppose the gallstones slips into the bile duct, then it can lead to cholelocholithiasis and obstructive jaundice. It can again, for the same reason, lead to the cholangitis. When it obstructs the ampulla of Vater, it can lead to pancreatitis. So this is the natural history of the gallstones. So The effect and complications of the gallstones. So, in the gallbladder, what are the possibilities? The patient may be having recurrent biliary colic, or the patient may develop acute cholecystitis, which is severe infection of the gallbladder. The patient may be having may develop chronic cholecystitis, that means recurrent chronic infection of gallbladder, and there are chances of empyema of gallbladder, mucocele of gallbladder, and gallbladder perforation. Empyema of gallbladder is pus collection inside the gallbladder. Mucocele of gallbladder is mucus collection. When there is mucus collection, when there is blockage of the gallbladder at the cystic duct or at the neck of the gallbladder by the stone. So what will happen? The further there will be no more bile entering the gallbladder. So the remaining bile will get absorbed through the mucosa, and the gallbladder secretes mucus. Some mucous membrane of gallbladder also secretes mucus. So the bile get absorbed and only the mucus is present. So that will form mucocele. Then sometimes there is gangrene of gallbladder due to the infection, and it can lead to perforation and peritonitis, localized or generalized. Then in the bile duct. So if the stone slips in bile duct, it can lead to obstructive jaundice. It can lead to ascending cholangitis, that is infection of the biliary channels, and it can lead to acute pancreatitis, which is called gallstone pancreatitis. The pancreatitis, actually, there are two most common causes of pancreatitis are number one is alcoholic pancreatitis, and number two is gallstone pancreatitis. Next is in the intestine. So sometimes the gallstone may slip into the intestine either through the bile channel, or there may be some fistulous connection between the gallbladder and the duodenum. So the stone slips into the intestine, and it can cause obstruction at the narrowest part of the small intestine, which is usually the ileocecal junction. So the stone may get impacted in the IC junction, and it can cause obstruction. As we can see, it's written gallstone ileus, but it's not an ileus, because ileus is due to the paralysis of the intestine, paralytic ileus. But this is a type of dynamic obstruction in which there is some mechanical obstruction in the intestine. So, how do you come to diagnosis of gallstone? So, the presence of symptom attributable to gallbladder is must. That means the symptoms should correlate with the gallbladder stone findings. Next is important is abdominal ultrasound, non-invasive investigation, first investigation, which is usually done for the abdominal pain. So ultrasound will show the presence of stone, and it can differentiate from the polyp. Sometimes the polyp is also present. Then the wall thickness of gallbladder can be seen. The diameter of common bile duct can be seen. If it is dilated, then we can suspect a stone in the bile duct. Then any hepatic abnormality, cirrhosis of gallbladder, cirrhosis of liver, or any hepatic cyst or abscess can be seen. Liver function test, blood test. Usually the liver function test in gallstone is usually normal, unless and until there is blockage in the common bile duct. Then it will lead to derangement of liver function test. Or when there is severe infection of gallbladder, there can be mild derangement in the liver function test. So coming to the management, asymptomatic patients, we already know that a non-operative approach is preferred, and in symptomatic patient, treatment is surgery, and laparoscopic cholecystectomy is the gold standard for gallstones. Nowadays, very rarely open cholecystectomy is done, even in village areas. Most commonly, laparoscopic cholecystectomy is done. So if the patient is waiting for surgery, if the patient is in waiting periods for surgery, so at that time we can advise the patient to avoid dietary fat and large amount of meal. So, and diabetic patients have again higher risk of acute cholecystitis, so these patients should be managed promptly. And 90% of patients are symptom free after cholecystectomy. And there is a conversion rate of around 5% from laparoscopic to open procedure, because sometimes the gallbladder may be the calot strangle may be frozen, or there may be a lot of adhesions, or sometimes there is bleeding due to inflammation. So in these cases there may need to be conversion to the open procedure. So next is chronic calculus cholecystitis. So chronic calculus cholecystitis is again the symptoms may be similar to the biliary colic, but they are more severe as compared to simple colic. So as you know, there will be the definition is ongoing inflammation with recurrent episodes of biliary colic, or the pain from cystic duct obstruction is referred to as chronic cholecystitis. So due to the repeated attacks, there is scarring and thickening of the gallbladder. So there is increased subserosal and submucosal fibrosis, and there is increased infiltration with the chronic inflammatory cells, which are monocytes. So there will be mononuclear infiltration, and usually the gallbladder in these patients is non-functional. So clinical presentation of the chronic cholecystitis is the pain like biliary colic lasts for 1 to 5 hours and usually subsides by 24 hours. If it is longer, then acute cholecystitis should be suspected. Again, there is association of nausea and vomiting in the painful episodes, bloating and belching sensation, and there is no fever and jaundice. It is very rare. Physical examinations are usually normal. The patient may be having abdominal pain, but on physical examination, there may be no tenderness in the abdomen, and lab function are usually normal. LFT is also normal. So diagnosis is by clinical evidence of the gallstone, clinical presentation and evidence of gallstone on diagnostic imaging. So ultrasound provides important informations. It provides information regarding gallbladder wall thickness, polyps, CBD diameter, and hepatic abnormality. Sometimes we encounter in the ultrasound that there is sludge in gallbladder. That means there is no stone, but there is sludge in the gallbladder. Sludge is a thick and muddy material inside the gallbladder. So biliary sludge is it's a mixture of cholesterol crystals, calcium bilirubin granule, and the mucil gel matrix. So is it an indication for surgery? It depends upon if the attacks of the gallbladder biliary colic are associated with USG findings of sludge in gallbladder in 2 or more times, then only surgery is indicated. That means if the symptoms are there with the USG finding of the sludge in gallbladder. So this sludge can further lead to the stone formation. It can form a nidus for stone formation. Gallbladder surge is also present when the patient is in prolonged fasting state and when there is parenteral nutrition going on for some other reasons. So in these cases, sludge may form due to the cholestasis. So the management of chronic calculus cholecystitis. Elective laparoscopic surgery is the treatment. As I said, avoidance of dietary fat and large meals in the patient awaiting surgery. Diabetics are at high risk of complication and they should undergo early surgery. And sometimes pregnant patients come with acute pain in abdomen. They may be having colicky pain, and on ultrasound USG findings, gallstones are present. In such patients, we have to wait for conservative management till the patient gives birth. And uh, what are the conservative managements? Dietary modifications, that means avoidance of dietary fat and low amount of food, frequent small meals. And if the conservative management fails, then the surgery is possible in second trimester. So surgery is usually safe in second trimester of a pregnancy. So as you know, the 90% of patients are asymptomatic after surgery. There are then there are some other uncommon disorders which are known as cholecystosis. So cholecystosis are a group of disorders which are chronic inflammatory disorders, and there is hyperplasia of the mucosa. So number one is cholesterosis. Cholesterosis is also called strawberry gallbladder. So why this strawberry gallbladder is called? Because the interior of the gallbladder is looks like a strawberry. So the reason is multiple mucosal aggregation of cholesterol crystals in the mucus. So the interior looks like a strawberry. Next, when there is submucosal aggregation at a one point, so it can form polyp. So cholesterol polyps are there. So these cases also surgery is indicated, and in polyps the surgery is usually indicated if the polyp size is greater than 1 centimeter. So preparation for cholecystectomy. What are the important precautions we should be taking before we subject the patient for surgery? Number one is appropriate history. The symptoms should be relating to the gallstones. Then the fitness of the patient is assessed. So cardiovascular and respiratory fitness should be there, because these patients are usually obese and middle-aged group, so there are chances of cardiac problems. So ECG, echocardiography should be done to rule out cardiac disease. Then if the patient might be having respiratory symptoms due to obesity, sleep apnea, all these things can be there. So pulmonary function test is important. Then blood count is essential for checking the hemoglobin level. Liver function test is important. If the liver function test is normal, then we can go for surgery. Then coagulation profile is also very important, because some patients are hypertension, and these patients are maybe taking anticoagulant prophylaxis. So coagulation profile is important, and so PT-INR is done, prothrombin time INR ratio. Then the consent should be taken that we are proceeding for the laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and there are possibilities of there's rare chances of injury to the bile duct, injury to the bowel, and there is chances of conversion from laparoscopic to open procedure. So the complete operative details should be told to the patient. Anesthesia, in which anesthesia we are taking the patient. Usually it's taken in general anesthesia. Then prophylactic antibiotic is very important. Usually the antibiotics are given just before the starting of the surgery, before the induction. DVT prophylaxis, compression stockings, limb physiotherapy should be given. So laparoscopic cholecystectomy, the most important part of the laparoscopic cholecystectomy is identification of the Callot triangle. Last time we discussed the Callot triangle. It is formed by the cystic duct, hepatic duct, and the inferior border of the liver. So Callot triangle dissection is very important to avoid any injury to the bile duct. It is done in general anesthesia. So first of all, we do cleaning and draping, and then create pneumoperitoneum. Why pneumoperitoneum is needed? Because we need space to work into the abdomen. So pneumoperitoneum is created. Then comes the port placement and positioning of the patient. Patient is usually positioned in reverse Trendelenburg position. So Trendelenburg position is head down position when the head position is lower, and reverse Trendelenburg position is when the head is upside. So table is tilted with the foot end down, and there is left tilt, so that the gallbladder, so that the bowel loops they fall to the left side. So we can easily visualize the gallbladder. So, creating of pneumoperitoneum, there are two methods to create pneumoperitoneum: by the closed procedure with Veress needle and open procedure using Hessen's cannula. So, pneumoperitoneum is which gas is commonly used? Carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is why carbon dioxide is most commonly used, because it is non-inflammable. If we use oxygen, then it can be inflammable, because we use cautery machine, electrocautery, so there are chances of any passage of current, and CO2 gets easily absorbed into the blood and excreted through the respiratory system. So that's why carbon dioxide is most commonly used for establishing pneumoperitoneum. So in the this inset you can see the CO2 insufflator machine, which is showing the pressure of the how much pressure. Usually we set the pressure to 12 millimeter of Hg, because after if we increase the pressure greater than 12 millimeter, then what will happen? It will compress the diaphragm and there will be difficulty in breathing. So the CO2 insufflator, it shows the pressure settings and shows the flow rate. It shows how much liters of CO2 is insufflated inside the abdominal cavity. So there are two methods. By the closed technique, we use Veress needle, and by a small incision, 1 centimeter incision, using an open Hessen's cannula. So these are the laparoscopic ports we are putting, so that the instruments can be put through these ports. So these are the SS ports. So the positioning is very important in any type of laparoscopic surgery. So as we can see in this lap cholecystectomy, we are using 3 ports. Number 1 is umbilical port. This is the first port which we insert, and this telescope, laparoscope is inserted, and you can see the CO2 insufflator is connected through this port. And again there are 3 ports. One is the assistant port and 2 are working ports for surgeon. So this is the laparoscopic view of the gallbladder. As you can see, this assistant instrument is holding the fundus of the gallbladder. You know the parts of the gallbladder: fundus, body, Hartmann's pouch, neck, and cystic duct. So the assistant is holding the fundus of the gallbladder, and he is retracting it towards the diaphragm, towards the right shoulder. So we can see this. This is the liver. This is the segment 4 of the liver. Then we can see the part of the stomach, and then this is the sulcus of Rubeus. The dissection should be above this sulcus only to avoid any injury to the bile duct. So as I said, the Callot's triangle dissection is very important. So we can see this is the cystic duct, this is the inferior border liver, and this is the hepatic duct. So first the dissection is first done in the Callot's triangle, and the cystic duct, cystic artery are carefully demarcated, and the peritoneum overlying this cystic duct is removed. So we can skeletonize the cystic duct and cystic artery. So after then we are sure that there is the anatomy is clear, then we can clip the cystic duct and cystic artery, and then we cut the cystic duct and the cystic artery, and the gallbladder is then dissected away from the liver bed, and we can remove the gallbladder from the umbilical port. So this is the step-by-step procedures we do uh, uh, in cholecystectomy. Peritoneum is divided, cystic duct and cystic artery are identified, and routine cholangiogram is not necessary. Sometimes when intraoperatively we see that the CBD is dilated, then we can do a cholangiogram by putting a guide wire through the cystic duct and pushing a radiopaque dye and getting a image radiographic done, and we can see if there is a filling defect in the common bile duct. So there is no need of routine cholangiogram if the previous ultrasound and liver function test are normal. So once the anatomy is confirmed, cystic duct and artery are clipped, gallbladder is dissected by electrocautery from the gallbladder bed, and it can be removed from the umbilical port. When the patient is not fit for laparoscopic surgery, then we do open cholecystectomy. What are the contraindications for laparoscopic surgery? Nowadays, with the advent of the anesthesia, there is very less contraindication of laparoscopic surgery. Most commonly, if the patient is having cardiac disease, severe cardiac disease, or having respiratory disease, then we go for the open surgery, or when the facility of laparoscopy is not available. So open cholecystectomy is similar to the laparoscopic approach. The incision is right subcostal transverse incision given. Again, the steps are similar to the laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Coming to the complications of surgery. So complications can be due to the laparoscopic part or due to the gallbladder. So common complications of laparoscopy are nowadays which are very rare. Injury to the bowel. When while establishing pneumoperitoneum, there may be injury to the blood vessel through the various needle, or bile duct injury if the anatomy is not clear, and most of the times maybe due to the acute cholecystitis, or when there is a severe adhesions are present, there may be chances of bile duct injury. Then retained bile stones. The stones may be retained in the residual cystic duct stump or the bile duct. Then a bile leak, and sometimes in 10% of patient, the patient is continuing to have pain after cholecystectomy. So that patient may be due to some other pain symptoms. If we if we have not done proper diagnosis of the patient may be having other symptoms, other problems, for example, renal calculi. So these can be reason of post cholecystectomy pain. Post cholecystectomy pain are present in 15% of patient, usually related to pre-op symptoms. So full investigation should be done to exclude stone in CBD, stone cystic duct stump, operative damage to bile duct. So for this, MRCP or ERCP is done. Last time we discussed MRCP, magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography, and ERCP is endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography. Again, the ERCP is the advantage that if there is some retained stones, we can remove through ERCP. Then coming to the complication of bile leak. So bile leak can be due to the leakage from the cystic duct stump. For example, when there is acute cholecystitis and there is inflammation of cystic duct, and the cystic duct is dilated. So after the inflammation resolves, there is slipping of the cystic duct, slipping of the clip from the cystic duct. So in these cases, possibility of bile leakage can be there, or when there is some abnormal bile duct connection, for example, duct of Luschka. So in these, so how can you diagnose a patient, post-operative patient of bile leak? The patient may be having fever and chills. There may be right upper quadrant pain, patient having severe upper quadrant pain, and the LFT may be deranged. The bile hyperbilirubinemia may be present. So again, you have to order investigations, CT scan and ultrasound. So what are the findings you find in CT scan and ultrasound? We can find there may be bile collection, fluid collection in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen, Morrison's pouch. So that confirms your diagnosis of bile leakage. So how will you manage a patient of bile leak? So first of all, symptomatic management of the patient. For example, these patients are having electrolyte disturbance. They may be dehydrated due to the fluid loss in the thirst space. So you have to collect the electrolyte imbalance. You have to maintain the hydration. Then we have to start on broad spectrum antibiotics, and then we have to drain for the bile. So we can go for percutaneous drainage of the bile, USG guided percutaneous pigtail drainage. And still the bile is there is lot of bile output, then we can go for the ERCP and stenting of the bile duct. So if there is if there is failure to resolve, then possibility of common bile duct injury should be suspected. So retained bile stones, last complication is retained bile stones. So it is usually present within 4 weeks after cholecystectomy. But if it is found after 1 month or years after cholecystectomy, then we call it as recurrent stones. So the presentation is usually right upper quadrant pain, obstructive jaundice, LFT may be deranged, bilirubin and alkaline phosphatase is elevated, and the treatment is ERCP and endoscopic sphincterotomy. So endoscopic sphincterotomy allows the passage of stones, and rest of the stones can be removed by the Dormier basket or self-retaining catheter, balloon inflated catheter. So that completes the topic gallstone and chronic cholecystitis. In the next lecture, we'll discuss acute cholecystitis and further. Thank you.